Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this panel entitled "To an Uncertain Degree, Climate Change and Security." And that title notwithstanding, there is nothing uncertain about the link between climate change and security. Drought, ice melt, sea level rise, all pose real and immediate risks, not only to our economic and social well-being, but to peace and stability. And that is the case not only in fragile states, but worldwide. As the Munich Security Report points out, already during the decade up to 2018, 87% of internal human displacement around the world was caused not by conflict, but by weather-related disasters. In other words, the climate crisis has become a classic threat multiplier, and that is widely recognized, including by the Pentagon. So what is uncertain is our willingness and ability to use the very short window of the next 10 years to put into place solutions that can limit warming to an at least somewhat manageable degree. And that, of course, is what our title is driving at. In this panel, after a brief assessment of the climate change threat, because I think in other years we have done very extended assessments, including last year here in this very room when we heard from Professor Schellnhuber, we will do a brief assessment here before we turn to the question of solutions and ask how we can scale up really effective, really meaningful climate action in the time that we have. So we begin now with a challenge, and it's a very great pleasure to welcome Jennifer Morgan. She's Executive Director of Greenpeace International. She's an environmental activist with long experience, including leadership positions at the World Resources Institute and the WWF, advising governments and companies on sustainability and climate action. So Jennifer, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much to the Munich Security Council for the opportunity to address you today, and I greatly appreciate that. I'm here as a challenger, as you've heard, and if you will, I think a representative of the millions of people around the world who care deeply about these discussions that are happening here. They know that climate change is a security crisis. They know that the climate emergency is a global emergency. And, we have entered the decisive decade that will determine whether higher temperatures will trigger tipping points of no return, a decade when global emissions must be halved, which means 7% reduction each year and then driven to zero. This is the decisive decade. And what we choose to do in the next couple of years, so not the next 10, but the next couple of years, will make the difference literally between life and death for millions of people. According to the United Nations, the world is currently on a path to 3.2 degrees warming by 2100, but many experts believe it's more like a 4-degree trajectory. And that might not sound like much, but it is. Because a 3-degree world would be dominated by extreme weather, water scarcity, food insecurity, and resource conflicts. It will be a world where millions of people are on the move. Last year, with just a 1-degree rise, there were a record number of 22 million people were internally displaced, mostly by extreme weather events. And in a 3-degree world or a 4-degree world, I can't even imagine it, this will soar. It will be a dark, chaotic world. And we must not let this happen. So here, briefly, is what needs to change. You, if I may, the security community has to start treating climate change as the existential threat that it is. Your community has to internalize the risk that climate change poses to national and international security and come to grips with the main cause of this security risk: fossil fuels. Because fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, have become carbon bombs that, if extracted, are set to decimate our earthly home. This means that foreign and security policies should no longer be focused on how to protect the extraction of fossil fuels, but rather should be focused on how to keep them in the ground. For they are the weapons, the new weapons of mass destruction. They are the bombs that need to be dismantled. And we need you and your help to play your role in that dismantlement. You are trusted voices in government who can bring the security dimension into domestic energy policies, into that equation. You can speak with the financial sector and implore them to divest from fossil fuels and those carbon bombs. And this may seem strange that the head of Greenpeace is asking a general to talk to a CEO of a bank, but these are dangerous times, and we all need to go outside of our comfort zones. Because CO2 disarmament, getting rid of the carbon bombs of oil, coal, and gas, and all fossil gas, must become the world's new peace mission. Countries need to be 100% energy secure through the building up of renewable energy and energy-efficient infrastructure. This is true energy security, which can also bring economic prosperity and opportunity, but we have to move quickly and at scale, and that combined with the development policy that for climate vulnerable populations are core elements of that new peace mission. It also means implementing and strengthening the Paris Agreement. And those who are undermining that agreement are putting their own national security at risk, and they are endangering millions of people. This global agreement must be defended, and its ambition ratcheted up in November in Glasgow. We are in a moment in history that will be remembered by what you do right now. Will you and other leaders take this climate crisis for what it is, a crisis, and put the full energy and the weight of your community into this fight for life? Or will you cower away because it's complex, it's political, it's too hard? I know those of you who are in the room are here because you know in your hearts you have a duty to help and to move the world forward, and you can make a massive difference for your children and your grandchildren, indeed all children. So I invite you together to come with us on this peace mission that we can and must forge together for the future of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Morgan, for that challenge, and we will pick up on that in just a little bit in our panel. But first, we hear a scene setter from the Senior Vice President of Global Affairs at Google. Google is one of the world's largest corporate buyers of renewable power, and it recently also announced the launch of a green startup accelerator, and our speaker says that he is fundamentally optimistic about the power of innovation to help resolve this crisis. So please welcome Google's Chief Legal Officer, Kent Walker. Kent, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Jennifer, thank you for that call to action. We can already see the footprints of climate change around us in the floods and wildfires and food shortages and resource instability that is plaguing the world. There is extraordinary urgency here, but I would put to you that there is also, if we work together, cause for hope. So I've been asked to make a second lightning statement, a challenging remark to kick us off. So here goes. Solving the climate challenge will require not just breakthroughs in policy, but breakthroughs in technology as well. Climate is commanding more and more time, attention, and resources from every government, every multinational, every tech company. We start by taking responsibility for what we do. Google and others in the tech sector are making great strides toward sustainable operations. We've been carbon neutral since 2007, and as was noted, we are the world's largest purchaser of renewable energy. Last year, we made the biggest purchase of renewable energy in history, 1,600 megawatts, nearly half of that produced here in Europe, spurring the creation of new clean energy infrastructure and over 1 billion euros in new investment in Europe alone. We're excited to join Europe's plan to create a carbon neutral data center sector by 2030. We already use artificial intelligence to make our data centers among the world's most energy efficient. We deliver 7 times more computing power using the same amount of electrical power as we did 5 years ago, 7 times more. Combined with our purchases of renewable energy and high-quality carbon offsets, our data center operations are already carbon neutral. If Europe's entire data center sector achieved similar levels of efficiency, we would cut energy consumption by 50%, more than all the energy consumed by every household in Sweden. Still, we can and we must do more. So let's talk not just about our carbon footprint, but our carbon handprint, what we can do by working together to change and improve this state of affairs, to solve this problem. Problems are inevitable, but problems are also solvable. Now, the solutions may bring their own problems, which call for more solutions, but that's for another day. Here in Munich, we are here to talk about how people and governments around the world should support the development of new tools, new incentives, and new research and development that promotes climate security. In many ways, technology is already bending the curve. We're seeing technology contribute to efficiency, to the production of less polluting forms of energy, and to better transportation and energy choices. More fundamentally, AI and machine learning are in the early days of reducing supply chain waste, cutting industrial energy consumption, and helping with carbon capture and sequestration. Similar innovations will help modernize power grids and thermostats, improving energy distribution and consumption. AI, together with innovations in quantum computing, what some call the language of nature, mapping the ways the atoms of the universe talk to each other, may hold the key to improving chemistry, material science, and maybe even someday fusion energy. Progress in solving those problems requires a partnership, however, a partnership between technology and democracy. Because after all, if technology is the engine of progress, then democracy is the rudder. Together, technos and politicos have worked to drive meaningful innovation, exploring space, eradicating disease, and bringing more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty in the last 40 years. And today, when it comes to climate, we're seeing progress on both fronts, technology and politics. Tech is building on decades of investment in data centers, microprocessing, and research and development, seeing a payoff in AI, machine learning, and quantum. Democracies are expanding their carbon energy commitments, carbon-free energy commitments, exploring prices and rebates for carbon pricing, and wrestling with the difficult collective action problem inherent in international agreements. And we are seeing early results. Just this week, the International Energy Agency announced that global emissions stopped rising and flattened in 2019. In advanced economies, carbon emissions actually fell. But that's just a beginning. Expanding both R&D funding and advanced research partnerships between tech, government, and academia can accelerate innovation in areas that may help us cut the Gordian knot of having both more global development and less carbon. So to sum up, we need commitment from industry and support from government through smart regulation and new incentives for innovation. Action for today and innovation for tomorrow. Because while climate change is challenging our geopolitical stability and security, partnership between technology and government can accelerate the solutions that we so desperately need. With that, I'll turn things back over to Dr. Crane and this impressive panel.
Ken, you can stay right here if you don't mind, because that'll be your seat right there. So without further ado, I will ask the panel participants to please join me on stage. You have marked seats, but I'll help direct you when you come up, and then I'll introduce you when you're here. So, Senator, you are at the very end, I think, before me. Patricia, you're here. Senator Graham, exactly. General, perfect. And you're all the way at the end, Jennifer, essentially where they've just freed up the place behind the podium. So it's my great honor to introduce our panel, more or less in alphabetical order, starting with Ambassador Patricia Espinosa. She is Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and as former Mexican Minister of Foreign Affairs, she chaired COP16, which of course got to yes on the Cancun Agreement. Great to have you with us, Patricia Espinosa. Seated next to her is United States Senator Lindsey Graham. He is chairman of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary and a member of the bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus formed last year. A very warm welcome to you, Senator. Next to him is General Tom Middendorp. He is chairman of the International Military Council on Climate and Security and former Chief of Defense of the Armed Forces of the Netherlands. He also commanded a large multinational ISAF task force in the south of Afghanistan. Welcome to you. And finally, a special welcome to a regular on the MSC Climate panel, United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. He is one of Congress's toughest climate hawks. He is founder and co-chairman of its bicameral climate task force and has delivered well over 250, I believe it is, time to wake up climate speeches on the Senate floor. Is that right, the number?
You're making a huge impression.
So, dear members of the audience, as always, you can pose questions a little bit later on. We're going to start with discussion up here on stage. You can also do it via the app, but we're going to take questions the old school way as well, especially since we're an intimate group in this time slot. So I would like to begin, as I mentioned earlier, with a really brief threat assessment because I'm very anxious to get us to talking about solutions. So I'm going to go down the panel and ask each of you for a really personal view on the thing that's worrying you most, where climate stress is already exacerbating geopolitical tensions, jeopardizing human security. What, in your experience, is the thing of most concern? And if you can keep it to under 2 minutes, even around 1 to 1.5, I'd be so grateful. And I'll just go straight down, starting with Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would say that not long time ago, we used to think that climate stress was only visible in places far away from Europe, where we are now meeting. Today, climate stress is present everywhere, and it's everywhere really producing lots of economic losses, lots of political stress, political tensions, a lot of suffering in children, in older people. So I think that today we need to really acknowledge that climate crisis, the climate emergency is literally everywhere in the world. It is in our everyday lives. Yes, I can tell you I visited Tuvalu, I visited Fiji. I had the opportunity of exchanging with people that are really literally in the front line of the effects of climate change. But today, it's not for them that we should be working on climate change. It's for all of us.
Thank you. Senator Graham?
Well, what worries me the most is Sheldon. Is a joke. If there's ever a solution to this problem in America, it will be because of people like Joe Lieberman and Sheldon Whitehouse, who have done two things: preach about the problem constantly, but also give people like me the space to find a solution. So what worries me the most? In South Carolina, we've had 2 500-year floods in 3 years. So I go to Myrtle Beach, to the same community that's been flooded twice, and everybody there has a mortgage. They can't occupy their home. Do they get stuck with a bill, or do we try to find a way to move them to higher ground and help them start over? So this idea that the weather is changing dramatically, I buy. From a national security perspective, Africa has got enough problems. The place it hits the hardest, Bangladesh will get hit hard, but the place you'll see the most disruption is in Africa, a place that can tolerate the least more problems. So from a national security point of view, this is going to create threats and conflicts that can be avoided if we act responsibly now. And I can't say that about a lot of threats and conflicts that could be avoided. Usually they have to be, like Iran, you got to solve that problem. I don't know exactly how you do it, but with climate change, we know the things we need to do. We just need to do them.
Thank you very much. Gentleman Dorp.
To be honest, the biggest threat is us not dealing with the threat. But looking at the content, we just produced a report looking at all the threats all over the world, how climate change impacts, and 93% of the security experts that were involved see water stress as the biggest problem that we are facing. Water is becoming scarcer and scarcer. Meanwhile, the population is increasing this century with another 60%. So 3-4 billion people are added to what we already have, only increasing the demand of water. So water stress, the shortage of water is a big problem, but also the water floodings, because we see precipitation patterns changing, and it's damaging and threatening large parts of the world. We have mega cities, 70% of all the people live in coastal areas and on riverbeds, in urbanized areas. And these are threatened by these floodings. So just imagine the impact what this will have. Thank you.
May I just ask you to tie that to your experience in Afghanistan? Because I know that you said, and Afghanistan, of course, is quite a big topic here at this year's MSC. I know that you said when you were commanding that ISAF task force that it was an eye-opening experience for you, and I believe that was also had to do with water shortages. So if you'll just briefly tell us why that was.
Yeah, sure. No, it was an eye-opener. I was commanding there, and we had a district center that was flooded with Taliban, and they blocked all progress in the province, that we had to deal with that. We had days of hard fighting in that village to clear it from the Taliban. In the end, we succeeded, but we didn't solve the problem. And it took us a few months to find out what the real problem was. And the real problem that caused all the tensions in that village, which was utilized by the Taliban, was a dispute over the division of water. Well, in the Netherlands, we are water managers. So we flew in some civil experts, and they negotiated a solution with the local elders. And from that moment on, all the tensions were gone. The Taliban couldn't regain control anymore. And 1 year later, I was able to walk through the main street of that village together with our current king with very limited protection. And to me, that showed what the impact can be. This is on a small scale, what the impact can be of climate change. It also showed to me how strong we can be if we can combine military and civil efforts in a comprehensive approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Whitehouse.
If you look at how climate collapse cascades, you start with disruption of natural systems, which from a security perspective interferes with bases and operations of military forces, but also causes enormous suffering. And the collapse of the natural systems leads to an economic collapse, which is now very robustly warned of by virtually every central bank in the world. And of course, when there's an economic collapse, there's even more suffering. And the suffering leads to competition for scarcer resources and conflict. So that's stage 3, the conflict and competition stage. And then the part that scares me the most is that there is a reassessment done by people who have gone through a lot of suffering of the merits of parliamentary democracy and market capitalism, because their experience will have been of very grave suffering, and they will know that market capitalism and parliamentary democracy conspicuously failed, knowing this problem was out there, to address it. And that once you start things cascading, it's very hard to change it. So that's my worry, is at the end of the day, the values that we're here at the Munich Security Conference to celebrate and reinforce are the ones that are most at risk at the end of climate collapse.
Thank you very much. And let me then just get Jennifer and Kent's really brief thoughts on this as well.
I think the thing that has frightened me the most is the Hothouse Earth report that has come out from Johan Rockström, which basically looks at the tipping points after which you can't stop the melting of ice sheets, the West Antarctic or Greenland, or you can't stop the Amazon from turning into dieback and no longer absorbing CO2. And those tipping points are, some of them around 1.5 degrees, some of them are higher. And the thought that that can start happening and we can't fix it, that's the thing that keeps me up at night most.
Thank you. Kent?
I agree with that sentiment. I think for some of the technological changes to be able to help with this problem, we need to buy time now. And that requires action now, conservation, government action, short-term technological fixes, business changes. How much time do we have is the open question, but it's clearly not as much as we'd like.
General Middendorf, can I just ask you, before we move on to the solutions question, to say one word about how you see security threats in the high north, in the Arctic? Because besides Africa and the Sahel, I think there is no place where that is more on the front line of this security risk than the Arctic. And the West is sometimes, we have the topic Westlessness at this year's MSC, the West is sometimes accused of doing too little while we see escalating competition for land and resources on the part of Russia and also the self-declared near-Arctic nation China. So perhaps you can just say a word about how you see that risk.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's one of the main areas we focus on in the report. What we see happening is that the Arctic is melting in record tempo. And we have to adapt all our foresights every year because it's moving faster and faster and faster. And it's not just creating a new ocean, it's also creating a new geopolitical arena. We see a new area opening up with a lot of natural resources in it, and already we see countries trying to put flags in the ground and try to claim those resources. So that is a potential future threat, a new geopolitical arena with new frictions, and I think organizations like NATO, EU should refocus their strategies and see how they deal with it.
Senator Graham, I saw that you took the microphone. Perhaps you want to say a word, but I also have a question in relation to that because, in fact, it was mentioned here already today. I think it was the Secretary of State who said, who also talked about the Arctic and said that the U.S. has notified its concern about what's happening. Wouldn't perhaps the best way to deal with the risks there be for the U.S. to finally ratify the Law of the Sea Convention, which would give a framework for dispute resolution in that area?
Well, I guess, competition for resources that were not readily available but now are, that's one. But I guess the main thing about the Arctic, it seems to be like melting.
Law of the Sea?
Law of the sea, we can't get that passed at home because people on my side think that's a sovereignty issue. So Republicans and Democrats back home are divided on a lot of issues. There's movement on climate on the conservative side. Boris Johnson, pretty conservative guy, embraces climate change as a problem. We met with the Bavarian minister, president, whatever he is a nice guy. He said, climate change is real, but we're not going to be in a panic. Innovation, technology. He was someplace between denial and Greenpeace. That's sort of where I'm at. So let me just tell you what I think is happening. When you hear a politician in America on the Republican side say, I'm for clean air and clean water, that's sort of a way of getting your toe into the environmental debate. What I want to do is go deeper and say, climate change is real. The greenhouse gas effect from burning fossil fuels is heating up the planet. There's a logical, rational way that over time can increase GDP, and the country that finds the way to deal with this first wins a giant prize. I'd like it to be America, not China, from a conservative's point of view, I think that's the way you have to talk about it.
And I want to come back to that point in just a moment. Let us now switch to the question of solutions. And I'll perhaps start with Patricia in relation to the upcoming COP climate negotiations. You have said that the current trajectory that we are on will not get us to 1.5 degrees. The Munich Security Report that was issued prior to the conference says that upholding the Paris Agreement to stay to 1.5 actually is still feasible. So given the meager results that we had from COP25, what has to happen now to get us onto a different trajectory at the upcoming COP?
Well, in terms of the intergovernmental process under the United Nations, under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, what needs to happen now is that countries come forward with new nationally determined contributions, which are their pledges about what they intend to do in the coming years. We know, as is being here pointed out, that we are way out of the trajectory where we need to be. And we know that there are the elements and the knowledge and the instruments in order to get us to a trajectory that is consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement remains our collective way forward. It is a covenant of hope for the world. And this is what we need to abide to. We need to guide all our decisions in every sector of the economy, in every level of government, make them consistent with those goals that are established in the Paris Agreement. 2020 is a very important year because this is a year where countries need to present new nationally determined contributions. So far, only 3 countries have presented updated nationally determined contributions. One is the Marshall Islands, another one is Suriname, and the third one, the most recent one, the first developed country to present a new, updated, more ambitious plan is Norway. We know this is not enough. So if we can manage to get a very important push through the nationally determined contributions that need to be presented at the 2020 conference in Glasgow, we will be making a very important step forward.
Jennifer, can I ask you, in a way we can think about the Paris Agreement as a multilateral roof over a house with lots of rooms that are essentially self-determined by the member states. So if the roof is a little leaky, much of the discussion here at the conference is about perhaps declining commitment to multilateralism. If that multilateral roof is a bit leaky, does it matter?
It certainly matters. I mean, I think it's interesting in a time of questioning multilateralism, the Paris Agreement has pretty much hung together. I mean, and I think this year is a key year, and I would say it's a little bit more than what you say because it is a binding international agreement. It has a long-term goal to get to zero emissions, zero funding down to financing of greenhouse gases, adaptation. It has a binding reporting and verification. And I think that's important for the security community to be aware of as well, because there's that piece in there. But I think this question of 2 things I would add to it. I think its heart is still beating. The heart of the Paris Agreement is this ratchet mechanism, which countries need to increase their ambition. And so having the European Union's Green Deal come forward with a much stronger target, having the EU-China summit move that forward is quite important. But I also want to say that, yes, the UNFCCC is important, but the Glasgow COP also needs to be a place for other things to happen. The UK is a financial center. So I think Glasgow needs to be the moment when actually the banks of the world come together and they make clear that they understand the material risk of climate change and they're going to start actually regulating, making mandatory disclosure, putting in stress tests. So I just want to broaden it out because the countries are absolutely essential. But I think that the public is going to be expecting more than that. The corporate sector is on our minds.
Let me come back in just a moment to talk a little bit more about what the corporate sector can do, but perhaps, first of all, a word on other actors, namely also state and local actors. And Senator Whitehouse, one of the reasons for disappointment at COP25 was inaction by major emitters, including, of course, the United States. We heard that call from Jennifer at the beginning that leave it in the ground. Oil and gas need to stay in the ground. You have actually said that the current U.S. administration has been subject to takeover by the fossil fuel industry. So in view of that, what, for example, can other actors in the U.S. do? State, local?
First of all, you've got to see Paris as a floor and not a roof. We've got to do better than Paris. And one of the ways you do better than Paris is by breaking some of the political deadlocks that have held back very known and logical solutions like pricing carbon. And the reason we can't do that has been because the fossil fuel industry enjoys a multi-hundred billion dollar annual subsidy in the United States alone, which gives it vast resources to apply to our politics, which is why I fear the consequences for parliamentary democracy's reputation from all of this. We have, in fact, allowed our system to be corrupted by the fossil fuel industry. And what's happening right now is that the financial services industry and public pressure are starting to counterbalance the pressure out of the fossil fuel industry. And I'm working very hard to do everything I can to collapse this kind of castle of denial that's been built by the fossil fuel industry. When that collapses, then it becomes much easier for people in politics to make the right choices without having to face catastrophic political consequences. So getting the fossil fuel industry into its political cage to behave like a normal and responsible industry is critical. Having other industries like tech and finance and ag stand up and actually enter the political debate is going to be very, very important. And I'll close with this observation because I'm actually, like Lindsay, we're inhabitants of our US political ecosystem. We know who's there and who's not. We know who's doing what. And right now, corporate America is completely absent from the climate conversation in Congress. At best, they don't show up, but maybe join a couple of friendly groups. At worser, they are members of trade associations that are active antagonists to getting anything done. And at the very worst, they're the fossil fuel industry continuing to run its apparatus of obstruction and threat that it uses to control Congress. So that can all change very quickly when powerful political forces in the US decide they're going to come in and push back.
So you have submitted a proposal for a carbon fee. You don't call it a carbon tax, you call it a carbon fee.
Yep, because the revenues don't go to government, they go back out to people and states.
Essentially a carbon rebate, you could even call it.
Precisely.
A number of prominent Republicans, many of them no longer in government, but a number of prominent Republicans have commended this carbon fee proposal, as have some big US companies. Do you think you can get it through?
Yes, because as you get serious about this, and as the politics begins to move, and you look at what the alternatives are, when do nothing goes away as an alternative, then you're either regulating or innovating or pricing your way through the problem. Innovation goes away very quickly if, as Google said just a moment ago, you don't have the incentives to innovate. We are getting innovation at the rate that we deserve right now because of the way incentives are set up. Right. You put a $50 per ton price on carbon, innovation is going to explode. We will be alive with innovation. So those two end up connected. And if you don't do those, then you've got to go to regulation, and now you've got a whole set of different political problems. So of all of these things, the carbon price is the best, the most efficient, and the one that kicks off the innovation.
Let me get Senator Graham's take on that, because you said last summer when you publicly acknowledged the seriousness of the climate crisis threat. You said the U.S. should rely on innovation rather than regulation to try to come up with suitable solutions. So a carbon fee, as Senator Whitehouse just said, that's not really regulation. What do you think?
Well, so here's the great trade-off. I think the power companies in America would accept a carbon fee if they had regulatory relief. You can't have both. But let's talk about the idea of pricing carbon. Our highway trust fund is falling apart at home. We haven't increased gas taxes in decades. We don't have enough money for roads and bridges, so contractors and truck drivers would say we would absorb an increase in gas and diesel taxes if you put the money into the roads and bridges we need to make our living. So I think there's growing consensus that the trust fund needs to be infused with capital. Now, how many of you believe by 2050 there'll be more electric cars on the road than there are now? That's easy. How many of you believe there'll be a majority electric or hybrid cars? Okay, we've done that without pricing carbon. Why? Because consumer demand in the transportation world is changing. Why? I don't think everybody at home has woken up to be a member of Greenpeace. It just seems to be, among younger people, that hybrid vehicles are an attractive purchase. And when you see Volkswagen, BMW, and other major car companies putting more into hybrid vehicles and less into internal combustion engines, that tells you something. Now, a price on carbon can accelerate that process in transportation. On generation, the more viable solar and wind becomes is the day that carbon is priced. So, from a conservative's point of view, the sooner we can find out how to make an electric car more fashionable, we're going to meet the demand and export that product throughout the world, right? From a conservative's point of view, the day that you can make renewables more efficient and the technology to advance wind and solar is developed in America, the more our GDP will grow. That's my point of view. I think a price on carbon is not quite necessary to get people to change on the transportation side, but it would accelerate the change that's already there, and I think it's essential on the power generation side.
I don't want to turn this into a U.S. policy discussion alone, but one brief follow-up, if you'll allow me. In the 1970s, the U.S. developed a technology that became gold standard worldwide, catalytic converter, and we did it because of emission regulations.
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay, yeah, so the problem is when you do all these polls, climate change is a problem, 69%. When you ask people how much are you willing to pay to solve the climate change problem, about $20 a month. The problem for politicians is if you're going to make the changes necessary, impose a carbon fee, Sheldon is smart enough to know you got to have a rebate because people on fixed incomes can't absorb it. So the politics here is very difficult. You've got to design systems that take care of low-income Americans and people worldwide to absorb the consequences of increased costs for power and transportation. And that, to me, is the challenge. What did Sheldon say that was so important? The day that the Chamber of Commerce comes into my office and says, we can accept a carbon fee because it will generate innovation, we think we can beat everybody else there. What's missing, I think Sheldon's right about this, is corporate America needs to get more involved in helping politicians design a energy policy that's going to result in some consumer increase in prices, but they can help us. And if they don't help us, we'll never get there. The left is there. What does the right need? I've accepted the science. I need business to help me. Without business, I'm not going to be successful.
Okay, I want to pick up on that one moment, but in terms of that nexus between climate policy and social justice, Jennifer, I know that you have said there's one country out there that perhaps doesn't get enough credit for the job that it's doing in trying to triangulate those two, and it's Spain. Can you just say a brief word about that?
I mean, I think, it's clear that when climate policy gets implemented, it needs to make sure that it doesn't impact low and middle income people who, had very little to do with causing the problem, first of all, and second of all, shouldn't be paying for it. And if you look at the higher income, you can see there's plenty of money there to be spent there. I think Spain has done a good job also of a just transition, where they've worked very hard with labor unions and with others to phase out coal. And I think that's obviously a key part of the solution. But, we can't take anything off the table right now, sorry, but we need a mix of policy mechanisms. We need prices, but we also need regulation. It's very clear in the literature what's needed to move things. If you look at the percentage right now of electric vehicles, if we had 50 years, that would be fine. But actually, the German auto manufacturers are not moving. You can see, if you look at the percentage that is actually there as far as EVs go. And they've been working very hard to block regulation, block pricing mechanisms to move in that direction. So for me, it's crystal clear. Okay, we can bring in a high enough carbon price to start shifting stuff, but you can't take other things off the table. When Senator Lieberman, I just have to say, having worked in Washington for so many years and having watched your leadership, if we had made that happen then, we would be in a different situation. But we've lost so much time that we can't take anything off the table right now. And I think there are ways of doing policy mechanisms that protect people who shouldn't be impacted by those higher prices. And sorry, but I'm a little nervous about getting corporate America involved in climate policy. I think they've been plenty involved over the years, and we've seen what's been going on.
Patricia, you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add a comment on, I feel this conversation is very much about cost and burden. I think we need to change the conversation also. We need to put an emphasis on opportunity. It is not, first of all, the opportunity, we're really talking about the existence of humanity. Second, we are talking about getting better jobs for people, better wages for people, better quality of life. So I think this is a very, very important point because, yes, the transformation and the different instruments that need to come in place in order to really get to where we need to be are just so complex, and it has to do with politics, it has to do with social realities, it has to do with historical realities, with all kinds of issues. But at the end, it is and it needs to be seen as a way to opportunities, to a better world.
So, Kent Walker, your remarks ended with a very similar statement that government and industry need to work together. So from your point of view as a technology company, what can you contribute? How can you help to shape that opportunities narrative?
I think there are several levels. One, we want to be an example in the tech sector of how you can do sustainability right to help delay the tipping points that Jennifer talked about. We want to share our expertise. We want to partner with other companies. We want to collect. It's not enough just to increase the demand side. We have to increase the supply side, and that requires a lot of companies to be demanding cleaner and better power as well as conserve it. Second, obviously, we can invest in these longer-term solutions. And we are starting to see some of these things on the horizon that have great promise. We can't do it alone. Our quantum work was done as a public-private partnership with the US government, with US universities. There's a lot of promise there. And then lastly, I think some of the platforms, if you look at Google Search and News and YouTube, have a role to play in promoting high-quality science, just as we have with the coronavirus epidemic. If you go to our services now, you will see information from the WHO at the top of our services, highlighting the risk and giving context. That's not to say we can or should block all dissenting points of view, but I think it's important to be able to provide context, and we're looking at different ways to do that.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that, because the head of the Congressional Climate Committee sent a letter to the Google CEO, I think about 3 weeks ago, asking or urging you to include climate disinformation on your list of borderline content on YouTube, meaning content that would be either reduced or in some way overseen and taken down. Is that something you're thinking about doing?
It's a challenging area, but it's an area we are taking seriously. When you get into the world of political expression, many Republicans will accuse Democrats of wanting to raise taxes, and many Democrats will accuse Republicans of wanting to abolish government services. And we can't get into every one of those debates, nor should we. I don't think it's our place. But I think when it comes to questions of science and promoting accurate science and debunking conspiracy theories, as we do now, if you put in, did men really walk on the moon? You'll see a YouTube video perhaps saying men never walked on the moon, but you'll also see a note saying, here's a Wikipedia article that provides better and more accurate information. So we're looking at how to do this across our services.
If there's one other thing that Google could do, along with basically every other American corporation, it would be to not let the fossil fuel industry go unchallenged in the political arena of Congress, and not let the fossil fuel industry command and control the national corporate trade associations. And at the moment, corporate America has let both of those things happen. They've let fossil fuel run rampant through Congress with no counter pressure, and they have allowed all of the corporate trade associations to be taken over by fossil fuel and become fossil fuel front groups. And change those two things, and Lindsay's life and my life both get a lot easier, and we get much more quickly to where Jennifer wants us to be.
So, General Middendorf, let me bring you in on this. And Jennifer Morgan actually said in her remarks she would like to see generals, members of the military sector, going to company heads and talking to them about how serious this risk is. Is that a role you can envisage for yourself and other members of the military community? I know that this new report that your council has brought out talks about the importance of the military sector, but says civilian leadership is absolutely crucial. So how much can the security community actually do here?
Well, thank you. I think it's not just Jennifer and Greta from Sweden who are ringing the alarm bells. It's increasingly also generals, admirals, and high-level security experts who are ringing that same bell. And they are connecting. Within half a year, we now have experts from over 32 countries in every continent of the world uniting in one network because they are concerned about what's happening here, and they feel guilty that they have to leave such a world to their children. They want to do something about it. And they are very concerned because they have seen the impact. They have seen the impact of water stress, how that creates tensions. They have seen the impact of droughts, how that drives people away from their homelands, causes migrations, drives them into the hands of extremism. So they are very, very concerned about this, and that's why they want to pick this up. And that's also why people expect Jennifer and me to kind of collide. We come from two different worlds, but we are united in this. We are two sides of the same coin. And I hope we can join efforts together because that's exactly what is needed. And in all the domestic discussions, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the immensity of the problem that we are facing. I come from a country, small country, that is below the sea level to a large extent. We have been fighting all kinds of wars during our history, but the biggest war was our war against the sea. Half of our population lives below the sea level. So you can imagine sea level rise, what that means for a country like mine. But not only my country, many countries in the world. This is an existential threat, and we need to deal with it that way. And after the Second World War, we had a major flooding in the Netherlands, driving thousands of people, tens of thousands of people away from their homes and killing people. And the government then was facing a severe economic crisis, had to rebuild the country after the World War, and it was very tempting to do some patchwork and fix the dikes. But they took a wise decision. They said, no, we are not going to do that. We are going to invest much more money into a future-proof system. We're going to invest in innovation and find new solutions to protect our country, to protect our people against this new threat. And that's the kind of leadership that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator, you wanted to add?
Yeah, so how do you from a conservative's point of view, how do you engage this issue? The first thing you talk about is the science, okay? How many of you people here at my town hall meeting believe climate change is real? You don't have to raise your hand. How many of you believe it's a hoax? How many of you are not sure? So then I said, well, how would we find out if it was real? Ask a scientist. How many of you believe that'd be a good person to ask? Most people raise their hand. Don't ask me because I'm not a scientist and I have the grades to prove it. So, what if 9 out of 10 scientists said, hey, it's real? If you went to 10 doctors and 9 of them said you should quit smoking, and one said it's fine, you take a risk. So the science to me seems logical. Freon and other fluorocarbons put a hole in the ozone, and Bush 41 did some things to fix it. So I look at it logically. I don't know who to ask other than a scientist. So if most of the scientists say it's real, then where does a general help? Not to prove the science, but when I get national security experts say, not only is it real, but there's a lot of problems coming if we don't do something about it. So the military helps me sell it in terms of the consequences to everybody. The business community is essential for me to say we can do it without destroying the economy. We can do it and make the economy stronger. And if you're out there making $15 an hour in South Carolina, you got to pay the mortgage. You're probably more worried about that than 1.5 degrees. What if I could convince you that we can find a way to deal with the climate change issue and it not add an unbearable burden to your ability to get through the day? That's what I've got to do. So I need scientists to step up, and you have. I need the military to come forward, and you have. But what's missing is business to tell the public at home, this is not something to be dreaded. It is something to be embraced because we can change our economy rationally to help the environment, but come out of this thing stronger.
Senator, can I just ask you, because I did read online that you are interested in co-sponsoring a bill in the Senate with Senator Whitehouse, and given the gloomy attitudes about polarization in
And
the
Jennifer,
US,
if we do, please don't get on it.
So can you tell us what that bill would be? Where would you be able to go with your Democratic colleague? Sir, I have read that you are preparing to sponsor a bill
Well,
with Senator
we're
Whitehouse. What would that be?
Well, the first thing I want to do is Mike Braun is a senator from Indiana who is leading the climate. If I had to pick somebody to lead the climate change caucus, he'd have been my last choice on the Republican side. He just surprised the hell out of me. He came out of nowhere. The first thing, let's get a document saying the science is solid, right? That man is contributing to the problem, and here are the effects if we don't do something about it. Come out with a general set of principles that a price on carbon will accelerate the innovation that we need. If we can do that in 2020, there's going to be a debate in the United States. The gap between denying climate change and the Green New Deal is pretty wide. My hope is that President Trump will acknowledge that the problem is real and try to find a solution less draconian than the Green New Deal. Republicans, I think, can fight on solutions. I don't think we're going to win the war with young people denying the problem. So to every conservative out there, I think embracing climate change is a real problem. Will help the advancement of the conservative cause for people 18 to 35. And if we rely on good, solid business solutions and science, we can hold our own on the solution side. Last thought, from a conservative point of view, if we don't come up with some idea about how to combat this, we're going to lose a whole generation of young people who would otherwise be conservative. Because what have I learned? That if you say it's not real to most young people, they don't listen to anything you say about your tax plan because they've just written you off.
Thank you. General Middendorf, I believe you wanted to add something.
No, I just want to add that I think the military can be of help here. They can bring a impartial voice to the table, a voice that is not political, a voice that is not domestic, and a voice that has a certain authority. They can look from their professional perspective of what the impact is of this thing. And I think when they can help make the people feel that there is something at stake here that hurts them, then that can help this discussion. And I know the US military is quite advanced in that. They have been warning for this for 12 years. It was in the intelligence reports 12 years ago, and I know the Pentagon has made all kinds of plans to deal with this and are still making plans and also doing it. They are building resilience in their bases, etc. So on the executive level, they're working on this, but we need to raise this to the political level.
May I come back to Jennifer's challenge and the idea of leaving the oil in the ground and bring in a question that has come in from the audience, and it's this. Former Saudi oil minister Yamani had said that the Stone Age did not end because there are no stones left. Isn't it the oil age which has been agitating the climate problem? And are we going to wait until the last drop of oil to be burnt to see the end of the oil age? And perhaps I can take that as a bridge to ask you, Kent Walker, there has been discussion about the role of advanced technologies being used by oil and gas firms to explore for new reserves. And I know that has been raised in regard to Google's iCloud AI. Is this something where you're weighing whether maybe you want to end that kind of cooperation with the industry?
We have said that this is not a priority area for us. Our cloud business is relatively small by comparison, and we're focusing on other areas of concentration where we think we can add an awful lot of value.
Is that an area where government policy frameworks could be more helpful?
Say a little bit more about that. What kinds of frameworks do you have in mind?
Well, Jennifer, looks like you want to jump in.
I wanted to just come in as well on just where young people are going to want to work in the future, and the social license that comes along with this. Because I think what I am hearing from people in Europe, and I know we're having a mostly US debate, but I think it's really important to bring others in, is that, you know, that social license that has been there for so long from oil companies and from coal companies, et cetera, is deteriorating, and that therefore other companies that are associated with them, or museums, or you know, are going to be at risk from being seen as part of the past, and not even that, but being dangerous in the way that they are moving forward. And I think that it's something that corporate global, not just to move out of just the US, really needs to take into account, because I think who wants to be associated with an industry that is associated with literally extreme weather events that are creating chaos around the world. So I think, you know, being part of the solution, getting the laws in place, I mean, we need the companies that get it, that are going 100% renewables, to be standing up, right? I was in Davos. I met with the CEOs. I asked them afterwards. So they all tell me they care about climate change. They met with the president. I said, so did you share with the president that you think climate change is a significant risk? Have I heard you on the floor of the US Congress about this? No, right? And this is the test. This is the test. And I think that, you know, the next couple of years, how people, that's where the public is going to be, that's where youth is being, that's where voters are being. I'm interested listening to Senator Graham about that. I agree. I think it's a touchstone core issue now.
In addition to what Jennifer said about the social license, markets are also moving.
Yeah, yeah.
If you were an ExxonMobil shareholder 6 years ago, you've lost half your money, and Goldman Sachs just put a sell rating on your stock. And that presumes a lot of what ExxonMobil has said about its reserves to be true, which I think is not the case. I think ExxonMobil has made statements to its shareholders and to the public about its reserves that are false. So as that starts to slip away, you get into a situation in which there's real pressure to try to fix this and get this right. And that gives me actually some hope, because the markets are moving, the banks and regulators are moving, the social license is moving, And when the collapse comes, when the grip of the fossil fuel industry and its front groups on Congress weakens, we've got a very clear pathway forward with broad bipartisan support. So it could happen really almost any day.
Thank you very much. Patricia?
Well, I just wanted to make a point that is related to this issue of fossil fuels and the energy transition, the energy change, the phase out of fossil fuels, starting, of course, with coal, but then with all the others. And I think on that, I would just like to leave with you a point. I think there is a need for a broader conversation globally on how we can do and how to tackle this energy transition, this issue of phasing out coal, what are the instruments that we need in order to really get there? What are we going to do? For instance, I do worry because a lot of fossil fuel expansion is happening, for instance, in Asia, in some developing countries, countries that are very vulnerable to climate change. So how are we as international community going to support those countries in moving directly into the renewable energy, into clean energy, affordable energy, without going through the fossil fuel phase? I think that conversation we still have not had.
Thank you very much. Let me now issue an invitation to the audience to please rate. Yes, Claudia, we're trying to get a mic. There we go. Please. And do remind everyone who you are.
Thank you very much. My name is Claudia Roth. I'm Deputy Speaker in the German Parliament, Green Party. Patricia, you spoke about opportunity. I think we should not forget responsibility. Because if you speak to people, and I did it today in the lunch, probably next time we should do it here, with representatives from Ethiopia, with representatives from Sudan. I spoke to people from Bangladesh, from Chad, when they said that in former times the Chad Lake had the size of Germany. Meanwhile, it's the size of Berlin. 10 million people already today affected. So that makes clear that the climate crisis is a crisis of the global justice. So I would like to know, how would you describe or define responsibility? So differentiated, common but differentiated responsibility, and what does this mean for action? So NDCs, it's okay, it's important, but we need mitigation, regulation, resilience building, and we need loss and damage, and nothing, really absolutely nothing happened in the last COPs for those who are already terribly affected in the global south. And my second question is a question which we discussed, or we started to discuss in the German Parliament. What is happening if we have already millions of IDPs? You mentioned it.
Yep.
24 million, even more.
Displaced persons.
Internally displaced persons, yes. The World Bank made a study in 2018 speaking about 140 million in the next decade. So
By
we will also
2050.
have refugees. But these refugees, there's no legal status. They don't fall under the Geneva Convention. So how can we, are you discussing, or how can we guarantee a kind of legal, self-determined migration for those who have to leave the country? And what is, I ask you as a legal expert, what is happening to people where their national territory is completely disappearing? Kiribati or
Okay,
Tuvalu.
Claudia, I'm going to cut you off there and
No, what
get,
is happening
get some
then?
answers.
Do they lose citizenship? And there's an initiative, the so-called Nansen initiative, to introduce a climate passport. What do you think about a climate passport that would allow people that lost their national territory to live, to move, and to live in countries that are responsible for the climate crisis?
Okay, maybe Patricia, if you want to start, and if you have
Yes.
thoughts on the Nansen passport, that was actually a proposal made by Professor Schellenhuber, who spoke to us last year.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for raising this part. Well, it's actually very, very clear in the regime that needs to be built under the Paris Agreement how this part of responsibility is applied. There is, on the one side, yes, responsibility for everyone to act on climate change, to do mitigation, to build resilience, to protect natural areas, etc. But there is a very concrete responsibility for developed countries, those who were able to go towards the industrialization phase without any restriction on the use of resources, to provide support to those, as you mentioned, who have not the resources to really address their situation. And they are not now, in many cases, most of the cases, they are not responsible for a huge amount of emissions. However, we have to also be very conscious that the biggest areas that will be growing into the future in terms of population, in terms of their economies, will be the developing countries. And that means that we will see an increase in emissions from those countries. So it is absolutely essential that we do support those countries. We, developed countries, really fulfill their commitments and responsibilities in supporting developing countries on climate action so that they can have this economic growth, give their populations what they deserve, and at the same time reduce their emissions. Otherwise, the situation will just be what we are seeing now. The trajectories we are seeing now will continue.
Senator
Can I
Williams.
go back to my opening point by way of responding, which is we in the West very much live in a bubble of order and prosperity, and our thesis has been that we will slowly expand that bubble so that the world enjoys the benefits of a market economy and representative democracy and the order and the prosperity that they create. The people who you are speaking about have an experience of life, and that number is going to just grow. And the experience of life is going to be that they have suffered a lot. They've lost their home, they've lost their homeland, they've lost their prosperity, they've lost their known traditions of living, and they've done it because of actions that were taken within our bubble. Taken by parliamentary democracies or omitted to be taken by market economies or not taken. And it's going to be very hard not, let me put it another way, it's going to be very easy for adversaries to our system to use that against us, to turn that resentment against us. So the fundamental thesis that we're here in Munich trying to propagate, which is that if we spread parliamentary democracy and if we spread market economics around the world, we will have a safer, more orderly planet. We are undermining that entire thesis by creating millions of people who will look at parliamentary democracy and who will look at market economies and will say, that is what failed me. That is what failed me. And if there's one thing we ought to be able to agree on, it's that at all costs, we need to defend the integrity of those processes and have them serve us. Because when that is no longer a matter of common agreement, we have lost something that is very fundamental to the underpinnings of our safety.
So Jennifer wanted to comment, and General, were you just giving me a sign as well? And Senator? Okay, great. So Jennifer, please. Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a question of who has the system benefited in the West as well, because I think the system has benefited some more than others, that's for sure. But I actually, I wanted to come back to your question of justice and human rights. because it's clear that climate change protection is a human right. And I think the question in a way of what you're asking is who pays? And I think it's quite interesting for people to know what's happening around the world in this field, because, for example, there's people in the Philippines who brought a case after the typhoon to the Philippines Human Rights Commission. And that commission came out with its findings recently in November, and they found that they looked at the carbon majors, the largest emitting companies of the world, which now, thanks to good science, actually you can attribute the temperature rise to the companies. And that Philippines Human Rights Commission found that there had been a violation of human rights and had found that there is a liability for those companies for the damages. Now, and that's the Philippines, but you just need to go to New York City or to other places around the world who are now, on behalf of their citizens, suing companies because of their causing of the damages that are happening. And then you need to know that in legislation that is being introduced, those same oil companies that are now being sued are asking to not have any liability for past damage costs. Right. That's part of the bargain that's on the table, which is wrong. But I think, this is key. There's also a governmental piece, but I actually want to bring the corporate piece and the corporate responsibility in the room. And I think the attribution science that's there right now that can link these events with the responsibility for temperature rise is incredibly important development right now. Over 1,000 cases worldwide of litigation.
Thank you. So let me go to the general, sorry.
And Rhode
Senator
Island
Whitehouse,
is a plaintiff.
Right, and Rhode Island is a plaintiff. New York City, Rhode Island.
Yeah.
General Middendorf wanted to speak, and then Senator Graham.
Well, about responsibility, we have in the security community, we are facing major threats, hybrid threats, cyber threats, you name them. And most of these threats are very hard to predict. We have massive intelligence institutions trying to predict, trying to give us early warning on those threats. In this case, climate change.
Can we just say, sorry, can I interrupt just to say goodbye to Jennifer? I know you have to go because
okay.
you've had a
Sorry,
prior
excuse me.
engagement.
Thank
Let's
you.
just
Bye,
say
Jennifer.
thank you very much, Jennifer Morgan. Excuse me.
No problem. In this case, we know what's coming. We know in much detail what will happen in the next 10, 20 years when we see the effects of climate change. So that gives us a head start. And as a military, I know what the price can be if you do not act upon actionable information. So in this case, I think we have a responsibility to act, and we can all be held accountable if we do not do that. So I can only support you in your call to take responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Graham?
So for anything to be successful, you have to find consensus. Do you agree? You got to find consensus in parliamentary democracy. You're not going to find consensus in the United States with conservatives if you're going to put everybody in the oil and gas business out of business. Not going to happen. I'm going to support fracking and finding more fossil fuels in America to make us energy independent so we don't have to buy fossil fuels from people who hate our guts. That sells with a lot of people. Makes sense. Find more at home, buy less from people who hate your guts. That's not inconsistent, in my view, of trying to transition the economy over time to lower carbon because of the climate change problem. Bernie is suggesting 50,000 climate change visas. Good luck with that. You know, you're the Green Party. Why don't you introduce 1 million visas? The point is, you're not going to find consensus this way. We've got a problem. All I can say is I'll work with Sheldon because I think he's a very practical guy. But I want you to understand, as a conservative, I see it as a problem. But some of what I hear is not going to sell, and you're going to destroy the ability to have consensus. Because I'm not going to go to the United States and say, we're going to put everybody out of business who works in the oil and gas industry. I'm not going to say that because that's not necessary in my view. And as we deal with the displacement caused by climate change, we're going to do it rationally. And if you want the Paris Agreement to work, don't give China a pass. Nobody on my side of the aisle is going to enter into an agreement that allows China to get away with climate murder. They don't have to do a damn thing for 10 years. That ain't going to sell. Thanks for having me.
Kent Walker, can I just ask you, because General Middendorf talked about the crucial importance of accurate information for planning and preparedness, and I know that Google has a number of initiatives to do much more granular, very detailed climate information reporting. So can you just say a word about that and how that might play into preparedness?
Sure. A lot of these tools are extraordinarily valuable. You see Google Earth, Google Maps, which have been used to identify areas where you were seeing climate change very tangibly, to get ahead of some of the effects, the wildfires and floods. We've actually been able to use artificial intelligence, in some cases working with military and other responders, to try and anticipate flood basins and how they might change, where forest fires might move. So we were trying to use this array of information tools to deal with the problems of climate change. At the same time, we can try and incorporate nudges into our products, like showing public transit or bike paths in Google Maps, or promoting more smart thermostats through the Nest line of thermostats, which improve conservation and make it easier for people to conserve by default.
And have you had interest from fragile states, governments, looking to perhaps work with you on some of that?
We've primarily worked with larger nations such as India, which has a significant flooding problem, or even our home state of California, trying to think about the wildfires and how to resolve those issues. These are still proof of concept in some cases, but we're making rapid progress.
General Middendorf, I have a related audience question, and it's this. For those of us working to resolve or prevent specific wars, how do you advise that we incorporate climate change thinking into our work?
Yeah, well, I think, and that's one of the main findings in this report that we published this week, we need to climate-proof our policies and our programs. So, meaning that all the programs that we have, also towards fragile states, look at those programs through the glasses of the root cause of climate change, and look, what does this program contribute to addressing that root cause? And maybe we should refocus all our plans and programs. And it's not just on the development side, it's not just on defense, this is a whole of government issue. So through all channels, you have to build new criteria in that we climate-proof our policies, but also our infrastructure, also the way we train and operate.
Thank you very much. You want to do something with that, or you're just, yeah. I would take other audience questions if there are any. Not? Okay. One last question from me to whomever would like to speak to it, because it's something we actually didn't address so far, and that's interesting. Namely, to what extent the voices of young people, well, you introduced it indirectly, I think, Patricia, but to what extent the voices of young people, like Greta Thunberg, like Fridays for Future, have changed our thinking over the course of the past year? When we're talking about solutions, do you think those voices have made a difference? Anybody?
Very much. First of all, although some people have been so disgraceful as to try to do so, it is very hard and very mean-spirited to try to discredit a sincere young teenager.
Yes.
It's
She had a
much
really great
easier
answer,
to go
too.
after Greenpeace or say that somebody's a communist or whatever, but the sort of innocence of the young is much to their advantage, because the people who make a profession of discrediting their opponents are a little bit stymied by this problem. The second thing is, it's not just that it's sincere and from young people, but they're really out there. And, you know, Paris is closed for protests and kids aren't going to school. So it's bringing this issue, which is a very remote one, to front of mind and making people have to engage with it. And both of those things, I think, have been extremely, extremely helpful. And we're hoping that on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day coming up in April, the United States will see a lot of actions by a lot of young people that will again continue to push this to front of mind so that those of us who feel we're very close to a solution get that extra little push to get it done.
Thank you. General, would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I think these voices are very helpful. It's good to have non-political voices bring the message. At the same time, I think we should not shift the problem to them. It's a bit shameful that they have to do this. So we should pick up our responsibility and fix this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I said before, if you're a conservative and you want to be relevant in the 21st century, you need to have an environmental policy. Denial is not going to sell because denial is not based on good science. It's just based on a reaction to a problem. So, from a conservative's point of view, I want to engage the climate change debate. I want to argue about solutions. I want to admit the problem is real. To the young people of America and throughout the world, you are helping your planet by raising your voice. The most conservative families in America, children and grandchildren from 18 to 35, believe climate change is real. It is real. So there is a movement in the United States by young people, and the Republican Party needs to understand this. And in our platform, when it comes to environment, if there's a hole in the platform, there's going to be a hole in the growth. Having listened to this debate, I think we can do pretty well on the solutions being proposed. But we cannot deny the problem. Religious people, the Pope, that helps, but I need Baptists. There are more Baptists in South Carolina than there are people. So what I see happening on the religious side is that more and more conservatives, religious conservatives, are saying we need to be better stewards of God's creation. So two things are happening that give me encouragement. Young people are saying it's okay to talk about this. We want you to solve the problem. Religious people on the conservative side are beginning to believe that we're compelled to do better by God's creation. The missing element, and I'll end where Sheldon began, is that I need business people. To corporate America, you want to do the country a great service, come forward and embrace climate change is real and help me sell to the public at large solutions that are not overly draconian so that we can actually start solving the problem.
Thank you. Well, of course, last year we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the convention. Never has there been so much attention and so much mobilization around climate change as today. And we do attribute it a lot to the role and the voices of the young people worldwide. If you saw the Fridays for Future demonstration while we were in Madrid at the conference, hundreds of thousands of people walking on the streets of Madrid, that is really something that was not, I mean, people knew there would be a mobilization. I don't think anybody expected it to be as big as it was. And the conference itself has become really the place to go once a year for all the community that has to do with climate change. Right now, the numbers are getting almost equal in terms of participation of parties and participation of non-party stakeholders, and a big part of them are young people. And they have the credibility. They are talking about their future. They are talking about their children. They have the energy. They have the knowledge. And they are all connected. So they are much more powerful than we were when we were young. So we need that energy. We need that young people demand at home, in their communities, the changes that need to happen, demand that to the people in government, to people in Congress, to people in business, and they are doing it already. If you look at how the trends by young people are changing actually markets on many products, it is already happening. So maybe this is the last time I get a chance to speak here, but so I just wanted to say, for me, as the head of the UN Organization for Climate Change, this conversation is very encouraging. It confirms to me that the transformation has started. It confirms to me that the acknowledgement that we need everybody on board is really widely shared. So thank you very much for everyone here in the fantastic panel and for what you are doing on climate change. And please keep pushing.
Thank you, Patricia. And let me give Kent Walker the last word. And certainly social media and platforms have been the biggest multiplier of Fridays for Future's voice worldwide. So, pick up on that if you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is exactly where I was going to go. To complement Patricia's point about the next generation being the most connected generation, whether that's YouTube Creators for Change or other social media platforms, we're seeing extraordinary energy around this issue. And it's not just expressive, it's also people coming together to try to push for action in new ways. So that's a sign for hope, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all of you for this very reflective, but also in some ways encouraging debate. So let's give them a warm round of applause, please. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention at the end of a very long and intensive day. Bye-bye.